Glasgow in the late 1990s was a city in transition. Once defined by heavy industry and shipyards, parts of the city had been left behind, scarred by poverty, unemployment, and a simmering undercurrent of violence. In the pubs and housing estates of Postle Park and Mary Hill, a new kind of underworld was taking shape, one fueled not by whiskey smuggling or petty theft, but by the white powder that was rapidly becoming Scotland's drug of choice, cocaine. At the centre of this transformation was a family whose name would soon dominate headlines and police files alike, the Lyons clan. Steven Lyons, later dubbed Scotland's Mr. Big, didn't come from privilege or power. He was a streetwise young man from Glasgow's rougher corners who quickly understood that cocaine wasn't just a drug, it was a business, and one that could be scaled into an empire. Alongside cousins and close associates, the Lyons began as small-time operators, running stolen cars and dabbling in cannabis. But as the market for cocaine exploded, they saw their chance to rise above the rest. What made the Lyons stand out was not just their ambition, but their willingness to enforce their reputation through fear. Violence was the currency of the Glasgow underworld, and the Lyons paid in full. Rivals were threatened, beaten, or worse. Businesses knew better than to cross them. Their ability to combine family loyalty with ruthless discipline allowed them to expand quickly. By the early 2000s, the Lyons' name was synonymous with Glasgow's emerging cocaine trade. They were no longer hustlers in pubs and back alleys. They were becoming a syndicate, and as their profits grew, so did their enemies. Chief among them were another powerful family, the Daniels. The stage was set for a gangland war that would plunge Glasgow into years of bloodshed and terror, leaving ordinary people caught in the crossfire. If the Lyons were rising fast, there was only one family powerful enough to stand in their way, the Daniels. The Daniels had been embedded in Glasgow's underworld for decades. Based out of Postle Park, they were already notorious for their grip on drugs, protection rackets, and armed robberies. Their patriarch, Jamie Daniel, was as feared as he was respected, a figure whose influence stretched across the city. Where the Lyons were seen as hungry upstarts, the Daniels were old guard gangsters, men who had built their reputations through years of violence and intimidation. Clashes between the two families were almost inevitable. What began as disputes over drug territory soon escalated into a full-blown war. In pubs, housing schemes, and on quiet Glasgow streets, the Lyons and Daniels clashed in ways that left a trail of blood and fear. One of the most high-profile casualties of this feud was Kevin Gerbil Carroll, a notorious enforcer linked to the Lyons. In January 2010, Carroll was gunned down in broad daylight in a supermarket car park in Glasgow. It was a chilling reminder of just how far the war had spiraled. Gunmen armed with semi-automatics fired at close range, shocking even a city accustomed to gangland violence. The murder was widely believed to be part of the Lyons-Daniels feud, though fear and silence in the underworld meant few dared to speak openly about it. Shootings, firebombings, and stabbings became the calling cards of the conflict. Innocent people were caught in the crossfire, and entire neighborhoods were left on edge, never knowing when the next attack would come. Cars were torched outside family homes. Businesses were forced to pay protection money just to keep their doors open. The feud was no longer about money alone. It was about pride, control, and survival. Police described it as one of the longest and bloodiest gang wars in Scottish history. Despite repeated arrests, convictions, and surveillance operations, both clans proved incredibly resilient, using family loyalty and community silence to shield themselves. By the mid-2000s, Glasgow was living under the shadow of the Lyons and Daniels feud. And while both families were spilling blood on the streets, the cocaine trade continued to grow, pulling in millions. For the Lyons, the war only hardened their resolve to dominate Scotland's drug market, whatever the cost. While bullets flew on Glasgow streets, the Lyons were quietly laying the foundations of something much bigger, a full-scale cocaine empire. By the early 2000s, cocaine had replaced heroin as the drug of choice for Scotland's underworld. It wasn't just for hardened users, it had become a staple of the club scene, a weekend indulgence for professionals, and a steady moneymaker that never went out of demand. The Lyons recognized this shift before many others, and they moved quickly to seize the opportunity. Through contacts in Spain's Costa del Sol, long a safe haven for British gangsters, the Lyons tapped into a direct supply line from Colombian and Dutch cartels. Shipments arrived through European ports, hidden in lorries, containers, and even fruit consignments. From there, the drugs were smuggled into Scotland, where the Lyons oversaw a vast distribution network. At the street level, their business model was simple but brutally effective. Trusted lieutenants controlled areas of Glasgow, parceling out cocaine to smaller dealers who worked round the clock. Each door-to-door dealer operated like a taxi service. Customers called. The drugs were delivered within minutes. The system was so efficient that police once described it as faster than ordering a pizza. To launder their growing fortunes, the Lyons invested in legitimate-looking businesses. Taxi firms, security companies, and even properties became fronts for moving illicit cash. Nightclubs and pubs gave them both income and influence, embedding their presence in the very heart of Glasgow's nightlife. Estimates suggested the Lyons were making tens of millions annually from cocaine alone. With that money came power, not just in the underworld, but also in their ability to intimidate communities and silence potential witnesses. Those who owed the money paid in fear. Those who resisted faced brutal consequences. The cocaine trade turned the Lyons from local thugs into international players. But with rapid growth came even greater scrutiny. Police Scotland, watching the bloodshed between the Lyons and the Daniels, understood that dismantling Scotland's cocaine empires would require more than just arresting street dealers. They would need to take on the clans at the very top. The Lyons had built an empire brick by brick, pound by pound, and kilo by kilo. But their success had made them targets, not just of rivals like the Daniels, but of the state itself. By the mid-2000s, the Lyons had become too big to ignore. The blood feud with the Daniels had already put Glasgow in the headlines for all the wrong reasons, but it was the sheer scale of the Lyons' cocaine trade that finally pushed Police Scotland into action. This wasn't just a local gang problem anymore. It was organised crime on an international level. The response came in the form of Operation Escalade, one of the largest law enforcement crackdowns in Scottish history. Launched in 2017, the operation involved hundreds of officers, surveillance teams, and intelligence specialists. Their mission was simple but daunting: to dismantle the Lyons clan from the top down. Detectives began by tracking the clan's finances, following the money trail that flowed from Glasgow to Spain, Dubai, and beyond. Front businesses were infiltrated, phone lines tapped, and covert surveillance set up around key figures. The police knew that targeting small-time dealers would do nothing. To bring down the Lyons, they had to strike at the heart of the operation: the lieutenants, the enforcers, and ultimately, Steven Lyons himself. The breakthrough came through painstaking wiretap evidence. Officers intercepted encrypted phone messages arranging drug shipments, cash pickups, and even discussions of violence against rivals. These recordings gave investigators the ammunition they needed to pursue major conspiracy charges. Raids followed. Homes were stormed, cars seized, and warehouses stripped of hidden stashes. Millions of pounds worth of cocaine, heroin, and firearms were recovered. Luxury cars and designer goods were hauled away as evidence of the gang's lavish lifestyle. But Operation Escalade wasn't just about arrests. It was about sending a message. For years, the Lyons had operated with near-total impunity, shielded by fear and the silence of communities too terrified to speak out. Now, their associates were being paraded through courtrooms in handcuffs, their faces splashed across national newspapers. Still, Steven Lyons himself remained elusive. Reports placed him on the Costa del Sol, living in luxury villas and moving between Spain and Dubai to avoid capture. Even as his associates were jailed, he continued to direct operations from abroad, earning him the title of Scotland's Most Wanted. The net was tightening, but for the Lyons, the fight was far from over. While Operation Escalade ripped through his empire, Steven Lyons himself managed to stay one step ahead. For years, he operated like a ghost, always out of reach, always just beyond the grasp of police Scotland. Reports placed him on the Costa del Sol, a long-time hideout for British gangsters. There, Lyons enjoyed the trappings of his fortune: luxury villas, fast cars, and exclusive clubs where his presence was as much a warning as it was a celebration. Associates flew out from Glasgow to meet him, receiving orders and passing back profits. Locals whispered about the Scottish drug boss living like royalty under the Spanish sun. But Lyons' reach stretched even further. Intelligence later revealed that he spent time in Dubai, another haven for international fugitives. In Dubai's glittering skyline, far from the schemes of Glasgow, Lyons mingled with other wanted men, all of them using the city's financial networks and lack of extradition treaties to keep the law at bay. Back in Scotland, however, the picture was shifting. Operation Escalade had jailed dozens of Lyons associates on charges ranging from cocaine trafficking to firearms offences. The once unshakable clan was being systematically dismantled, cash seizures worth millions, drug stashes intercepted before they hit the streets, and luxury assets frozen. Each blow weakened the empire Lyons had built. By 2022, the media dubbed him Scotland's most wanted man. Newspapers splashed his face across front pages, highlighting the violence linked to his clan and the fear it spread through communities. The Daniels feud had cooled, but the bloodshed and intimidation were far from forgotten. What finally broke Lyons' grip wasn't a single raid or dramatic arrest. It was the slow, relentless squeeze of law enforcement, with his lieutenants behind bars, money pipelines disrupted, and international cooperation tightening between British, Spanish, and European police. Lyons' empire was crumbling. He was no longer the untouchable boss who once terrorized Glasgow. He was a fugitive, living in exile, hunted not only by police, but by the weight of his own bloody legacy. The fall of Steven Lyons marked the symbolic end of Scotland's most feared cocaine clan. But even as he faded from the streets he once ruled, the shadow of his name lingered in Glasgow, a reminder of just how deep and deadly the city's gangland wars had been. For years, Glasgow lived under the shadow of the Lyons-Daniels feud. It was a war that claimed lives, scarred neighborhoods, and forced ordinary people to live in constant fear. But as the police tightened their grip on Scotland's organised crime scene, the fire that had once raged between the two clans began to burn out. The old guard, the men who had fueled the violence, were either behind bars, living in exile, or dead. Jamie Daniel, the head of the Daniels, died in 2016 after a long battle with cancer. His passing marked the end of an era, leaving the Daniels weakened and fractured. Meanwhile, Steven Lyons was in hiding abroad, his empire stripped piece by Operation Escalade. Without their most powerful figures, both clans began to lose their stranglehold on Glasgow. Younger generations of gang members, less disciplined and far less organized, failed to command the same fear. The cocaine trade didn't disappear, far from it, but control shifted into the hands of new players, smaller networks, foreign syndicates, and digital savvy dealers who operated in very different ways. For communities across Glasgow, there was relief, but also a bitter legacy. Families had lost sons, fathers, and brothers to the feud. Innocent victims had been caught in the crossfire of shootings and firebombings. Businesses had been forced to pay protection money just to survive. Even as the violence eased, the memories remained raw. The police, for their part, pointed to the feud's decline as proof that persistence pays. Years of surveillance, raids, and international cooperation had finally broken the back of Scotland's most feared cocaine clan. But on the streets, there was a different kind of lesson. People whispered that the war between the Lyons and Daniels hadn't ended because one side had won. It had ended because the game itself had changed. The old-school gangland families had been pushed aside by a new criminal economy, one that was quieter, smarter, and even harder to trace. The story of the Lyons clan is more than just the rise and fall of a Glasgow crime family. It's a window into how organised crime in Scotland and across the UK evolved in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. What began as small-time hustling in the streets of Postle Park grew into a multi-million-pound cocaine empire with international reach. Along the way, the Lyons left a trail of violence, intimidation, and fear. Their feud with the Daniels was one of the bloodiest gang wars Scotland had ever seen, costing lives and tearing communities apart. Yet in the end, the same factors that fueled their rise also sealed their downfall. Their willingness to use violence drew relentless attention from law enforcement. Their international ambitions made them vulnerable to surveillance and cooperation between police forces, and their reliance on family loyalty couldn't stop the slow erosion of power once their leaders were removed from the streets. The Lyons clan became a symbol of both the glamour and the brutality of the cocaine trade. Headlines painted Steven Lyons as Scotland's most wanted, but in the eyes of many Glaswegians, his empire was nothing more than a reign of fear. Today, the old feud has faded, replaced by new criminal structures that operate in different ways, but the scars of the Lyons era remain. For every pub that was torched, every family torn apart, and every business that lived under the threat of extortion, the memory of what the Lyons and Daniels feud cost Glasgow still lingers. It's a reminder that in the world of organised crime, empires always fall, but the damage they cause can echo for generations.